Hello guys, good afternoon. How are you today? I hope you all are doing fine. I think we can start. Yeah, so the topic today would be about link aggregation. Basically, I'll be discussing what it is. It's a pretty short, pretty straightforward topic, and it's easy to understand. So before that, I'll be discussing about some new updates on the cloud first. So I'll be discussing about cloud updates, and then we'll be going straight to the main topic, which is link aggregation. As usual, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to type it on chat or the Q&A option for Zoom, and then later on we'll tackle them. So for the new items on the cloud, right now the track record is almost every week we've been adding new features for the cloud. The latest feature that has been added is two-factor authentication. Now this is for when you log in. It adds a form of additional layer of security to enhance your or to protect your account. Now this applies to admin accounts for each cloud account. So you can easily enable it. By the way, by default it's disabled. So you can enable it on your account, and it will be on the specific organizations. So some of your orgs, you may enable them to require two-factor authentication. Some of them you can disable it. So we use 2FA together with Google Authenticator. So you're going to need the Google Authenticator app, which you can download from the Google Play Store or iOS App Store. Basically, once you hit enable for the 2FA, it will bring up this screen, which will then give you a QR code or a key. So you can either just scan the QR code using the Google Authenticator app, or just type in the key. And then it's going to generate a set of random numbers, 6-digit number. So this number would be randomized every 30 seconds or 15 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. Now you're going to use that code every time you log in to your account. So after you key in your username and password, then a second authentication would pop up asking you to type in a code. Now that would be from the Authenticator app. So again, this is for authentication, although not everyone would be using it. Maybe some of you would find this a hassle to use. So by default, it's disabled, but if you want more security to protect your accounts, you can just enable it from your cloud account. The other update that has been added recently is the ability to define the RSSI level on the heat map coverage. So we added the heat map function about, I think, a month ago for the cloud. Now here, if you hover your mouse over any area of your map, once you display your heat map, you'll be able to see the estimated RSSI value, meaning the signal quality. So here, for example, on this area, on this map, the signal coverage is about negative 57.83 dBm. So that would be my signal quality. The closer the number is to 0, the higher the signal quality. So if I see like negative 30, negative 20, that means I have very, very good signal. As it drops to like negative 60, 70, negative 80, that means that the signal is very weak. So if I move my mouse over this area, for instance, the white part, I would see about maybe negative 74 or 75 on this field. So it's a good way to estimate your signal quality on certain areas on the map. And then from there, you can adjust your AP's power or maybe reposition the access point. Another thing that has been added, more of a quality of life update, is that when you're trying to set up your access points if you're trying to, override certain settings on your AP, you're going to have a quick reference on what the overall network setting is. For example, under configuration, you've set all your APs on auto channel, let's say transmit power 21 dBm, channel width 80 megahertz. And then you want to override certain parameters here to be changed from the rest of the network. So you can do that here, and on the same field, you can see what the current network setting is. So for example, if you just want to use the network setting, you can just select that to use the existing setting on the network. The client alias, the ability to modify or change the client name, has been added as well. So this will be very useful later on once we add contact tracking. So what you can do for the client alias is basically you can rename all the individual clients. Let's say, for example, by default, like this desktop right here, desktop PN9KRS0, I can rename this to the person who owns it. So if I'm the admin of this network, I can easily identify which are the staff and which are the guests who just walk into the office. So it's a good way to quickly find individual clients, especially because some people don't rename their devices. It would just show the desktop, or it would just show Android and a bunch of numbers. So with this feature, it'll be easier for you to identify who they are. Now, talking about contact tracking, that one would come on the next release, tentative next week. So basically, what again contact tracking is, it allows you to select a specific day. You can backtrack up to 7 days before to check who are the people that are close to this specific client. For example, Amy, she went in the office at this specific date. You want to know who were in the vicinity at that time. So if you select her account on the system and then go to the contact tracking tab, you'd be able to see all the clients that are near her based on which AP they are connected to. Also on the next release, I think around mid-June, we'll be enhancing the EnGenius Cloud app, which will be called EnGenius Cloud to Go. Now, this is a breakthrough for the cloud app because it allows or unlocks more possibilities on managing your networks. Let's say, for example, you don't want to go through the hassle of opening your laptop, pulling up a browser just to set up a cloud access point. Let's say one of your clients just want to buy APs off the shelves and then set it up using an app as if it's like plug and play. So for resellers that may have difficult time to support a lot of clients, especially those that just come and go on their shops, this would be very handy for them because the EnGenius Cloud to Go app would come with a setup wizard. So in a way, it's like if you guys have played around with the EnGenius Mesh app, the application to be used for the EMR series, our routers, it has a wizard, so it will walk you through setting up the SSIDs, the passwords, and so on. So same thing with this app. So if you're going to add a new access point, it will walk you through a wizard, whether you want to set up the SSID. It will ask you if you want to enable band steering, what features you want to enable for your Wi-Fi, what security type, etc. But it doesn't stop there. It also will allow you to set up, for example, your splash page. You can modify your splash page, background, logo, and text from the app. And you can do a lot of configuration. You'd be able to configure your switches. You'll be able to configure your whole network, even without opening a browser even once. So from registration of the account till you add devices, configuration, as well as monitoring, you can all do that on the application. But of course, if you want more information, the full view, in any time you can always jump in a browser and then just type in the same username and password to give you the full portal for the cloud. So I'll be having a dedicated webinar about the EnGenius Cloud app. So I'll be running through a demo and a walkthrough on how it goes once it launches. Mid-June, we'll be adding more features as well. So one of them is the whitelist function, or VIPs, wherein, let's say, you have an SSID with encryption, and then you want to tag, let's say, the owner of the company or the president of the company or something to tag him as a VIP, so that whenever he walks into the office, he don't have to authenticate or key in the username and password every time he walks in. So once he's tagged as a VIP on the system, he'll just be connected instantly on the connection, even though you have encryption set. Another thing that we're adding is load balancing. So this one is for AP to AP load balancing for the client side. So that means if you have deployments in a convention room or a convention center or any area where you have a lot of access points, the AP or the system will try to check where I should set the client to, where it's best to set them, so that this would avoid overcrowding on a single access point. It will distribute it amongst all your APs on your deployment. Another interesting function that we'll be adding is a dynamic splash page feature. I'm sure everyone of you guys know about a splash page. Basically, when you connect to an SSID with Captive Portal enabled, then you have splash page enabled, you would get a pop-up screen. Now, usually this pop-up screen is static or fixed. It doesn't change depending on who logs in. Now, the dynamic splash page, what it does is, depending on who logs in, or I'm not sure what exactly we'll be adding, if whether it will be toggled between different options on your splash page or based on the login information. But basically, it's going to be dynamic. Depending on who logs in, the splash page may be different. Let's say you're a managed service provider. You're managing, let's say, a cafe, and then maybe a food store, and then maybe a retail shop. So depending on the client's location, where they log in, even though you have the same setting all throughout your whole deployment, the correct splash page will show. If they walk into a cafe, they'll get the cafe splash page. If they walk into the retail shop, they'll get promotions regarding that retail shop. So it's going to be very interesting for this update. I think the most awaited feature that a lot of you guys have been asking or requesting is the reporting function. So this one, hopefully, if no delays, we'll be releasing this by end of this month. I've mentioned that you'd be able to customize the reports. So you'd be able to generate templates. So that's still happening. You'd be able to do that from the system. As you can see from some of the screenshots right here, you're able to select, let's say, the cover letter. You're able to modify the text there. You can actually put your logo as well if you're the one that's managing the end user's network. So you can upload your logo. You can modify the text and everything, so it's easily presentable to the clients. So what types of report can you generate? So there are a lot of things that you can select or deselect depending on what you want to show. For example, you don't want to list all of these items. You can deselect them from the report list. Apart from that, I think one good feature is the ability to do scheduled reports. So from here on the system, you'll be able to schedule or generate a number of schedules depending on how you want the reports to be released, either weekly, daily, or monthly, so that you don't have to generate it each time. You can preload it on the system. So after a week, for example, the report based on your criteria would automatically be generated. So on your end, all you need to do is download the report and send it to the client for easier review. So again, this one will be added by end of the month. If it comes out earlier, we'll be having a dedicated webinar for this, as well as the EnGenius to Go app. Okay, so what is link aggregation? Basically, link aggregation, the summary of it is that you can combine multiple ports to act as one logical port. Usually, we use it for two main functions. One is to increase the bandwidth, the transfer speed from one device to another, or for redundancy or failover. Let's say you have two links set as link aggregation. If one of the link dies, you still have another one that's active to keep the connection there. Now, link aggregation is not limited to just switch-to-switch connection. It actually can be applied on switch-to-client device as well. For example, a switch to a NIC card with multiple ports on a server, or the switch going to a NAS, network access storage. Most of the NAS right now are equipped with multiple LAN ports, and usually you can link aggregate those. So if your NAS has like 4 LAN ports, most likely you'd be able to link aggregate those ports to have a more or faster transfer speed between the NAS and your network. So this enhances or speeds up the process of transferring files back and forth. Now, there are a lot of terms used to name link aggregation. Some people call it trunking, teaming, let's say port teaming, or port bonding, channeling, bundling, or lag. Some people call it lag or link aggregation group, but they essentially mean the same thing. Now, to quickly show you guys an overview on how link aggregation works, let's say you have two switches that you want to increase the transfer speed between both of them. So usually you have an Ethernet connection to link two switches. So most of the switches right now are running gigabit. So basically this means that you have a 1 gigabyte per second transfer speed between these two switches. Now if you want to add or increase the traffic, the transfer speed between these two devices, you can enable link aggregation. But without link aggregation, if you just, let's say, plug another switch, plug another cable to link this two, This actually wouldn't increase your speed without link aggregation. What it's going to do is, if you have STP enabled, your system would detect that you have a loop on your system. Now, STP would kick in, disable one of the ports depending on the settings, disable that port to prevent the loop from happening. Now, with link aggregation enabled, if you have two ports connected and then combine them together, this would be your connection now between these two switches. So essentially, if this is a gigabit switch and you're combining two gigabit ports together, you're going to have 2 gigabytes per second transfer speed between this device. Now, for link aggregation, you can combine up to 8 ports, and you can have up to 8 link aggregation groups on your network. So, for example, for this switch, this is a 24 port switch. You can have 8 ports connected in one group for link aggregation. That means my transfer speed between these two switches are 8 gigabytes per second if it's a gigabit switch. Now, once you combine those two ports, essentially this would be your trunk. And if you're going to set up like VLAN or STP, it will consider this port as one port. It wouldn't identify this as 2 individual ports. So when you're going to set up VLAN or STP, instead of applying that on specific ports, let's say here on the diagram ports 2 and 3, I would then select trunk 1, for instance, and apply VLAN there. Because this one, on the system side, this is viewing this as one single port only. And yeah, like I mentioned, you can enable link aggregation to connect the switch going to client devices as well, or end devices, maybe a PC, a server, a NAS, for example, to increase the transfer speed between both of this device. Okay, so link aggregation has 2 main options. You can either set it as a static link aggregation or LACP. What is LACP? LACP means Link Aggregation Control Protocol. Now, IEEE standardized link aggregation to name it LACP, or to enable LACP. What this means is this allows you to make all the functions standard, which means you can apply link aggregation and link 2 brands of different switches together and make it still work. It also enhances or resolves some of the issues that occur if you use static aggregation. Now, most of the time, if you're going to set up link aggregation, always select LACP. I don't see any benefit of using static versus LACP, because static aggregation have a lot of downsides. Let me show you guys an example. For example, you have link aggregation and then you set it to static. If somebody, for example, unplugs one of this cable, plug it on another side, your system would still detect both ports as active. So even though you actually move the cable somewhere else to another port that's not a member of that link aggregation group. So what's going to happen is that the files would still transfer as usual, but since one of your links are actually down, the system won't be able to detect that. But it's just going to try to transfer those files or packets, which will result into packet drops or network storms. And the main issue is that you can see that the link is active even though, let's say, even though this one is already unplugged, the system will still think that this port is still active. So it's still going to utilize that port and try to send the packets over there. And then when that happens, essentially you're wasting network resources, because it keeps on transferring the same file, which will resort to a lot of errors on the client side. He may always see invalid file transferred, or file transfer failed, or something like that. Now, comparing that to LACP, if let's say somebody accidentally transferred a port to another port, somebody accidentally unlocked it, auto failover would automatically work. So it will immediately detect that this port is down, which will prevent the system from using this port to transfer those packets. Basically, it will use the only port that is active. So again, when using static lags, the system will not be able to detect if your port is up or down. It won't be able to detect if the system has one of the ports where you plug in the what do you call this, the cable from your link aggregation group to another. It wouldn't be able to detect if those ports have certain VLAN settings or invalid settings. You always have to make sure that on setting up lags, on a static lag, all the settings are matching between two switches. Because if you have a mismatch, you wouldn't be able to detect that right away. You would need to do a lot of troubleshooting to do that. And for link aggregation control protocol, the system does this automatically for you. So whenever you have issues on the network, the worst thing that you can do is you would have a lower bandwidth, because technically you only have one cable left running on your system. But apart from that, the rest will function as normal. You wouldn't have any looping, you wouldn't have any packet drops or those kind of issues. Do you guys have any questions before I walk you through the UI on how to set up link aggregation? Yeah, I saw a question here, which Michael have already answered pertaining to Cisco. Now, some of the brands in the market, they have proprietary link aggregation. So they may have different terminologies and different algorithm on how they work out link aggregation. If you see a different option apart from LACP, that means it's proprietary, most likely, and it wouldn't be compatible between other brands. So if you want to make sure that the compatibility is there when using link aggregation, try to select LACP if the option is available. And yeah, for EnGenius side, or for most of the brands, if you're going to set up link aggregation, please select LACP. So it will let the system automatically sort out things if things go wrong. Okay, so let me open the user interface to show you guys how to set up link aggregation. Okay, so to set up link aggregation, you have to be on your switch settings. So first, select the organization or the network where you want to set up link aggregation, where the switch belongs to. So let me go here. Okay, I saw a very important question here on chat. Can link aggregation happen between non-similar ports? So for link aggregation to work from switch to switch, you have to make sure that the port where it's coming from, let's say it's running 10, what do you call this, gigabit speed. The port on the opposite end of your link aggregation should be also running a gigabit speed port. If one end is running 1000 and the other side is running gigabit, the link won't be established. So that's one of the main requirements for link aggregation. The port speed must be exactly the same. So once you go to your switches, go on to the details. And then from here, you have a dedicated link aggregation tab. So from here, you can see you can set up 8 trunks or 8 different link aggregation groups. And each of these groups, you can have 8 members of this trunk. So let's say let's enable trunk 1. So the only options we have here are static and LACP. So for this demo, let's say I want to link aggregate ports 1, 2, and 3. So that means from this switch, I'm going to have a 3 gigabit upload or download transfer going to another switch. Now, of course, the other switch has to be set up. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same ports. For example, here I set up ports 1, 2, and 3. The other switch where I'm connecting those ports can be 5, 6, and 7, or so on. So once I set it up and then I apply, this will essentially make one trunk for link aggregation. Now, from here, the system will treat these 3 ports as one logical port. So if, for example, I want to set up VLAN, instead of applying VLAN on ports 1, 2, and 3, you can see here that ports 1, 2, and 3 now are of a different color. If I want to tag, let's say, port 1 for VLAN 10, I won't be able to do that individually because it treats this ports as one single port already. So again, you can enable multiple link aggregation ports as well. Wait, let me disable this. So let's say you want to create 2 trunk ports. One is port 1 and 2, the other one is 3 and 4. Maybe they're linked or they're going to different switches. So you can apply that as well. So if you go to your VLAN, by the way, on the system overview, you would see them labeled as well. So you can see here that ports 1 and 2 are color coded, same with 3 and 4. Now, STP, this is a common question as well. How does spanning tree protocol affect a link aggregation? So if you have spanning tree protocol enabled, it doesn't matter if it's enabled or disabled because these are 2 different options. So STP would not interfere with link aggregation even if you have 2 ports plugged into the same switch. It wouldn't cause any loops on the network because the STP would skip this out. Now, would STP still work? Yeah, STP will still work as usual. For example, you have your lags here on ports 1 and 2. And then those 2 ports, you plug them going back here on your other lag, which is 3 and 4. Essentially, STP would still work in a sense that it would disable either your trunk 1 or trunk 2 to prevent the looping. So yeah, pretty straightforward. That's how you can set link aggregation on the switch. It's basically just selecting which ports you want to be a member of that particular trunk and select LACP and then apply. So again, just make sure that the switch that you're connecting to and from are running the same port speed. Most of the time it's set to auto negotiate, so we can leave it as that or as default to ensure that your link would work. Another question is, wait, let me disable this. Can I use ports that are not in succession? For example, what if I want to link aggregate ports 1 and 3? I want to skip 2. So yeah, you can also do that. Wait, let me apply this first. So for example, you want to link aggregate ports 1 and 3, skipping port 2. You can also do it that way. So it doesn't matter which ports on the switch you want to link aggregate, so long as, again, on the opposite side is the same number of ports and the same port speed. Okay, so there are questions right here. Let me go through them. Can it be 1 copper port and 1 SFP at the same time? You can do that, yeah. But just make sure that the copper side will be plugged in copper. On the SFP slot, the SFP module that you're using, maybe if it's for fiber, on the opposite side it should be the same as well. Are the switches industrial grade? In terms of what do you call this? The protection on the switch, these are not outdoor type switches. They're just a normal rack mountable switch. On EnGenius side, we don't have industrial switches yet. What's the difference from other competitors? Sorry, in terms of LACP, if LACP, it should be standard across the brands. If, for example, static aggregation, each brand would have their own algorithm on how link aggregation works. But if you're using LACP, which most of the time is used in traditional networks, then there wouldn't be any difference when connecting to other brands. Okay, we have a question here not related to the switch, but let me address it. Can the SSID be set on or off? I think the question here is, can you do scheduling on the SSID? Yeah, you can do that on the cloud system. By the way, if you set up link aggregation, it will actually show on your topology view as well. Let me check if one of the networks still has that enabled. Just a while. Yeah, I think they had their trunk disabled, but it will actually show as a trunk if you have a switches that are trunk right here. So apart from that, if you have redundancy, it will also show from here. So yeah, I mentioned earlier that link aggregation can be a form of redundancy. So what's going to happen is that, let's say you have 2 ports connecting on the same switch. If, let's say, one of those lines get cut, the other line would still be active, preventing the disconnection from happening. So that can be applied on different types of use cases. For example, switch to switch. Maybe the switch are a bit far from each other. Maybe you're connecting them through fiber. So even if you get a fiber cut on one of your lines, at least one of your lines will still be active. By the way, when you have link aggregation, both ports will be active at the same time. So technically, if one of those ports get cut, you wouldn't have any downtime. The other one would still remain active. So the only downside if one port gets cut is basically you have a slower speed than usual because you only have one port left. How reliable is a cloud system, and what are the precautions having these devices? I think this question is about the cloud in general. But basically, for our cloud system, we have a very high SLA level because our cloud platform is hosted on Amazon Web Services. And when we do any changes on the system, we don't go into a sort of maintenance mode. The cloud system would always be active. It would always be serving clients. Even if we're modifying or adding or removing features on the background, or let's say we're expanding the system, let's say we're adding some more options, basically the system will always be alive. And as a precautionary measure, we have the cloud system scattered on different data centers. So even if, let's say, one of Amazon data centers goes offline, you would still have another data center which would serve as a backup to serve the clients. Of course, the only requirement is if you want to use a cloud system fully is that your devices must have internet access. Because for some of the deployments, they don't allow internet access for the access points or the switches. In a cloud environment, in a cloud solution, your switches and access points would have to have communication as well to the internet for it to be able to talk to the cloud server. But you have a lot of benefits as well when using the cloud. Let's say, for example, processing power, you wouldn't have to worry about your own server. And in terms of keeping the logs, keeping the data, the statistics, so all of those are on the cloud as well. Another question right here is the device available for India? Yeah, the device is available in India right now. Later on, I'll provide your contact details to our country manager there so that they could approach you and provide you more information about that, especially on support and warranty. Okay, one question here is about a voucher. Let me read it for a while. The question was about a voucher, whether it can be set by days and by time, so that each day you can only access it for like 8 hours. Can it be done? The voucher actually has a time limit set based on your consumption. But it will once you start to use the voucher, the time would be running already. We don't have an option to make the voucher's time put on hold while you're not using the internet service. So basically, if you get a 24-hour access voucher, even if you're not accessing it at that time, the voucher would still be ticking. Yeah, so topic, guys, for next week would be VLANs. But in case if ever the EnGenius Cloud to Go app comes out earlier, we'll be changing the topic next week to be the EnGenius Cloud app. So it's either VLAN for next week or the EnGenius Cloud application. But if it's the EnGenius Cloud app, I'll be giving you guys a walkthrough on how to use the app, what are added on it, what can you configure, what are the limitations, and so on and so forth. Yeah, while I'm on the screen, let me show you guys wrong network. The aliasing. So right now here on the system, I've modified some of the names. We can quickly identify now who are the owner of the devices. For example, right here, wait, let me find a desktop. For example, here, the device name is originally just iPhone. So you wouldn't really be able to identify who the owner of that iPhone is. So by renaming it or putting an alias, it's as easy as just basically renaming it. You can identify quickly who owns this device or who that person is. So it's very useful if you're on an office environment or if you're an environment wherein you have a lot of guests in the area. So you can quickly know which are the guests and which are the staff. Now there's also a favorite button. So from here, you can easily find those individual clients. So let's say you favorite some of the clients here. So you can put them on the top so you can easily view them later on. Again, this client alias name change, it will be very useful once contract tracking is enabled on the system. Okay, there's a question right here regarding the topology that I've just shown a while ago. Let me show it again. Okay, the question here is, in this topology, it shows a redundant link between this switch going to this switch right here, VIPSW. The question is, would there be any loop because of this redundancy right here? So no, because SDP is enabled on the system, which is why I detect that you have a redundant link right here on your topology. Now this topology view is actually automatically generated by the system. So it can detect on its own whether you have trunks, whether you have redundancy, and so on and so forth. So here it detected that there's actually a redundant link right here, which is actually on purpose because in case one of the main line goes down, going back to this side for instance, at least the APs right here would still be active because it would be able to get the data from this redundant line from here. So the same thing applies on this switch. Since this is a VIP area, we always want this AP to be alive. So if this main line goes off, you still have another source of data to go through from. So it's sort of like mesh, it come to think of it on the wireless side. So you still have a backup line that will go active once you have it. But is the redundant link alive at the same time? No, it's not. So it will only be active if it's needed. As of the moment, SDP most likely disabled this link right here. That's why it's showing as redundant. Can you show the time schedule for the SSID? Sure, we still have time. So let me show you where to set up scheduling for your SSID. So scheduling is found on the configure button under the SSID option. So you have individual schedules that you can set per SSID. So for example here, splash test. Right now this one is disabled. There is a schedule tab, almost the last one on the side. So from here, this is where you can customize the Wi-Fi schedule. So if you enable it, you can set a time. Either the presets right here or a custom one. So if you want to customize it, basically all you need to do is adjust the slider. The blue part means that Wi-Fi is active. Let's say from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. You have the blue line right here. So your SSID is active at this time. For the rest of the period, it will be deactivated. So you can also switch it off at for an entire day. If let's say nobody's using your Wi-Fi system on Mondays or on Tuesdays. So basically, it's fully customizable. If you want it the other way around, let's say you want your Wi-Fi to be unavailable from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. For the rest of the time it's active, you can also do it that way. So gray means inactive, blue means active. So this is where you can set your SSID schedule. And you can set the schedule per SSID. So if you have 4 SSIDs, you can have 4 different schedules for each of those. How do you create a redundant link? Is it hardware wired connected? So yeah, basically if you want to create a redundant link from switch to switch, basically you just have to plug them up physically. So long as your SDP is enabled, it would declare that that port is redundant. Can we set the redundant and normal link operating at the same time? Yeah, you can do so. So that would be link aggregation. So if you want your redundant link and your normal port to be operating at the same time, that's what you have for link aggregation. So both are active, both are sending out data at the same time. If one is down, then you'd have the other one as a failover, which is also active. Again, please set your link aggregations to LACP. The only time that you would want it to be set to static is if the opposite end does not support LACP. So for link aggregation to work on that situation, you have to set it to static. Otherwise, always set it to LACP. So this works as a high availability topology. Yes, you can say that for link aggregation. Okay, another question right here. I believe this one is related to the scheduling. So users who are currently in session, if the scheduling, let's say you schedule it to be off at 8 p.m. and somebody's still connected at 8 p.m. So essentially he will be kicked out of that SSID. He will roam to another AP if that other AP doesn't have scheduling enabled. But if it's part of your same network on the cloud, because here under your SSIDs, this is applied on all your access points on the whole network. Unless you have another access point outside your network which runs the same SSID, then it will switch over to that AP. But if it's on the same network, so it will be applied to all your APs on this network. If let's say you have 50 APs in a hotel, and then you switch off the staff network, all the SSIDs on all those APs staff network will be disabled. Okay guys, so any follow-up questions? Okay, follow-up question again regarding SSID scheduling. So what if the AP have multiple SSIDs? It depends on the situation. For example, let's say here on my screen right now, I have 5 SSIDs. So let's say this 4 right here shuts off at 8 p.m. After 8 p.m., I still have splash test enabled. Now it would depend whether the client has authentication here on splash test or not. If this SSID is saved on the system, he knows the password, he will be able to connect here. Otherwise, if he doesn't know or he doesn't have authentication to splash test, basically he wouldn't be able to connect to the AP at all if the rest are already off on schedule. Yes, the recording link, you guys can check it out on our YouTube page, EnGenius APAC. Wait, let me open that right now. So this is the EnGenius Singapore APAC page where all the videos, marketing videos, and past webinar archives are in. You would be able to see all those past webinars from here as well, in case you missed out a few. Follow-up question again regarding scheduling of SSIDs. If, for example, staff SSID is active for 24 hours and you have a second SSID that's active for only 8 hours, can this be done? So yeah, you can do that as well. So since scheduling is independent per SSID, you can set one to be always active, another one to be time-based, and so on and so forth. Okay guys, if no more further questions, again, next week's webinar, same time, 2 p.m. On a Wednesday, it would either be VLAN management, or if we have information about the app early, or if we manage to get the test app early, EnGenius Cloud to Go app, I'll be doing a webinar about the application instead. So I'll be walking you through, guys, on the wizard, how to set up your APs and all that. Okay, a very good question here for the cloud. Do we need to configure all the access points before I plug it on to the switch? Okay, for an on-premise scenario, what we usually do is we need to pre-configure all the access points before we set it up. But for a cloud solution, you don't need to pre-configure the devices to set it up. Because since the configuration is on the cloud, you can configure the AP on the cloud or your switch. And then from there, once you plug your devices on the network, if they have internet access, they would pull all the configuration files from the cloud. So on-premise would need to be pre-configured before deployment. For cloud side, they can be configured anytime. Is there scheduling on the on-premise controller? So yeah, scheduling is also available on the on-premise controllers like the EWS switches or the EasyMaster. So you can also do Wi-Fi scheduling from there. Okay, so if no more further questions, guys, again, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I really appreciate your attendance. And if you have additional questions later on, you can just email us anytime or ask any of our distributors or country managers from EnGenius. So thank you guys for attending today's session. Take care.